Hi guys, have you ever wondered what life really smelled like in Victorian England? Imagine a world without daily showers, where soap was a luxury, and entire cities battled with grime, sweat, and the constant struggle just to stay clean. Tonight, we're diving into the forgotten rituals, weird inventions, and bizarre truths behind hygiene in the 1800s, and some of it might surprise you. Let's begin our quiet journey into the unfiltered reality of Victorian cleanliness. When we picture the Victorian era, we often see elegant women in flowing dresses and gentlemen in crisp suits, strolling along the streets of London beneath gas lamps and horse-drawn carriages. But the truth was much grittier beneath all that silk and velvet. Most people couldn't afford running water in their homes, and the idea of a relaxing hot bath at the end of a hard day was a rare treat for the wealthy, not an everyday event. For the majority, water was carried in heavy buckets from public pumps or wells. The simple act of getting enough water to wash with was a workout in itself, so you can imagine that full-body baths were infrequent at best. Instead, many Victorians relied on the sponge bath, a quick wash using a bowl of water and a rough cloth, focusing only on the areas that got the dirtiest, like hands, faces, armpits, and feet. Some families would share the same water, going one after another, and by the end, that bowl was anything but clean. Soap was considered a precious commodity, especially for the working class. The best quality soaps were reserved for laundry or special occasions, while everyday cleaning meant making do with lye-based bars that could be harsh and irritating to the skin. The wealthy, of course, enjoyed imported scented soaps, but even they used them sparingly. For most people, soap was used only on laundry day, or when dirt became impossible to ignore. And let's talk about laundry. Clothing was rarely washed as often as we might think. Most garments were made from heavy fabrics that could stand up to repeated wearing, and undergarments, like linen chemises and shirts, acted as a kind of barrier, absorbing sweat and protecting outer layers from getting too soiled. These underthings were washed more frequently, sometimes every week or two, but dresses, trousers, and coats could go months between washes. The sheer effort involved in hauling water, heating it over a fire, scrubbing garments by hand, and then wringing everything out and drying it, all without modern detergents or machines, made every wash day an ordeal. Add to this the ever-present smog from coal fires, and you can imagine how quickly even clean clothes could lose their freshness. For many, the scent of the city became part of daily life, a mix of sweat, smoke, horses, refuse, and the faint, sweet aroma of soap whenever you could get it. The rich, trying to distance themselves from the reality of city smells, developed elaborate systems of perfumes, scented handkerchiefs, and colognes. Yet even their grand houses struggled with dampness and mold, since heating and ventilation were nothing like today. If you were lucky enough to have your own servant, they might help you wash and brush out your clothing, beating dust from the fabric, or cleaning shoes with spit and polish. But for most people, staying presentable required a constant battle against the elements. This was daily life for millions during the height of Queen Victoria's reign, where outward appearance meant everything, but true cleanliness was often out of reach. Morning routines in Victorian England were shaped by necessity and resourcefulness. Without running water, most people woke up to the chill of unheated rooms, often grabbing a jug and basin to start the day. Water, fetched the night before or carried up from the street, was usually cold. Only the wealthy could afford to have a servant heat water over the stove, and even then, only a small amount would be used. Washing the face and hands was a daily ritual, but washing hair was a different story. Victorian women often went weeks, sometimes months, between full hair washings. The process was long and messy, involving harsh soap and laborious rinsing. To keep their hair looking fresh, women brushed it daily, sometimes for hundreds of strokes, which helped distribute natural oils and remove dust. For men, hair care meant regular visits to the barber for trims and an application of pomades or oils to keep styles neat, though these products could attract even more dust and grime. Teeth cleaning was another daily challenge. Toothbrushes existed, but they were made from animal bone or wood, with bristles from boar hair. Toothpaste was rare. Most people made do with homemade powders, baking soda, or even crushed charcoal. The taste was far from pleasant, and many simply skipped brushing altogether, leading to a population with notoriously poor dental health. Soap advertisements from the time promised miracles, but the reality for most was far less glamorous. Children were taught to wash, but the lessons focused more on appearances than true hygiene. Mothers might inspect their children's faces and hands, scrubbing away dirt with rough cloths and stern warnings, but baths were infrequent, a weekly event if you were lucky, and sometimes even less often. Bathing for pleasure or relaxation was almost unheard of. Even those who could afford a full bathtub often worried about the dangers of too much water. Some doctors warned that bathing could weaken the body or open the pores to illness, so many Victorians viewed the act with suspicion. Instead, they relied on dry cleaning methods, like brushing off dirt, changing undergarments, or simply applying more perfume. As the day progressed, the reality of city life set in. Streets were crowded with people, animals, carts, and the ever-present mud. Rain turned everything to a sticky mess, and boots became caked with grime. Women lifted their skirts to keep hems clean, while men dodged puddles and filth. Despite the constant struggle, cleanliness was a point of pride. A tidy appearance was a sign of good character, and families went to great lengths to present themselves well, even if it meant hours of scrubbing or mending old clothes. In the evenings, families gathered for supper, still wearing the day's dust. Before bed, another quick wash. A splash of water to the face, a rub of the hands, a change into a clean nightshirt. In winter, the cold made washing especially tough. Water might freeze in the jug, and icy drafts crept under doors. Still, routines endured, shaped by habit and necessity, and the hope that tomorrow would bring a little more warmth, and maybe a little more comfort. For many Victorians, the weekly bath was both a rare luxury and a dreaded chore. On wash day, families would haul heavy buckets of water to fill up a tin or wooden tub, usually set up in the kitchen or another warm spot. Water was heated slowly over the fire, and by the time enough had been gathered for even a shallow bath, the room was filled with steam and anticipation. The head of the household often bathed first, followed by the rest of the family in the same water, which quickly turned murky. Privacy was a rare commodity, and children often giggled or grumbled as they waited their turn, knowing the water would be cold and cloudy by the time it was their turn. For the poorest, public bathhouses provided an alternative, though even these required a few pennies and a willingness to share the facilities with strangers. Public bathhouses were a response to rising concerns about public health. Throughout the 1800s, epidemics of cholera and other diseases swept through crowded neighborhoods, and reformers began to promote cleanliness as a matter of civic duty. Posters and pamphlets encouraged regular washing, and charitable organizations sometimes provided soap and clean towels to those who could not afford them. Still, old beliefs died hard, and many Victorians remained wary of too much bathing, fearing it would sap their strength or cause sickness. Bathing customs varied widely depending on class and location. In rural areas, Families might bathe in rivers or ponds during the summer, using whatever soap was at hand. In the city, those with means might have a copper bath or a dedicated bathroom, though the term meant something very different from today. Early Victorian bathrooms were often little more than converted closets, and indoor plumbing was a novelty. The rich sometimes had elaborate bathrooms with porcelain tubs and beautiful fittings, but even they relied on servants to fill and empty the bath by hand. The process was time-consuming, and hot water ran out quickly. To freshen up between baths, people used cologne, scented powders, and even vinegar solutions. Dry shampoos made from starch or powdered herbs helped absorb oil from hair and scalp, while lemon juice or rose water could be used to perfume the skin. These homemade remedies were passed down through families, blending tradition with necessity. Hygiene was often a family affair, with mothers teaching daughters how to wash clothes, brush hair, and prepare homemade cleaning solutions. Boys learned to polish shoes, scrub their hands, and present themselves neatly in public. Despite the effort, true cleanliness was hard to achieve. The ever-present smoke from fireplaces and factories clung to skin and hair, while dust seeped through every crack. Even after a thorough bath, it was impossible to escape the lingering sense of city life. Yet for Victorians, maintaining these routines was a source of pride and a symbol of respectability, shaping not only how they looked, but how they felt about themselves and their place in the world. While bathing was a challenge, the struggle to keep clothes clean was another daily battle. Most Victorian households lacked the luxury of a dedicated laundry room, let alone a washing machine. Laundry day often meant an entire day or more devoted to soaking, scrubbing, boiling, and drying. The process began early, with women rising before dawn to heat water in huge kettles. Clothes were sorted by color and fabric, as boiling whites could help lift stubborn stains, but colored fabrics had to be washed more gently to prevent fading. Soap was grated or sliced, mixed into the water, and rubbed directly onto the most soiled areas: collars, cuffs, and underarms. Scrubbing boards were used to work out the worst dirt, and heavy items were wrung out by hand, which left many with sore arms and reddened knuckles. After rinsing, garments were hung out to dry, often across gardens, yards, or even city rooftops, fluttering like signals of domestic effort. In winter, when weather was too harsh for outdoor drying, clothes might be hung over chairs, doors, or makeshift lines strung through warm kitchens, filling the house with the scent of wet linen and soap. Ironing was a further ordeal. Heavy irons had to be heated on the stove, and each garment pressed quickly before the iron cooled down. For families with little space or means, these tasks seemed never-ending. Stains were common, and clothing often carried the ghosts of previous days: mud, soot, sweat, and the inevitable dust of city streets. Clothes were mended repeatedly, with patches and darns a point of pride, proof of careful housekeeping and thrift. Even for those who could afford to hire help, laundry was one of the most labor-intensive parts of daily life. Servants, often young women or girls, were tasked with endless rounds of washing, drying, folding, and repairing, sometimes at the expense of their own health. Soap and lye could leave hands raw, and cold water made the work nearly unbearable in winter. Clean clothes meant much more than comfort. They were a public signal of order and respectability. Well-kept garments showed that a family was responsible and upright, while visible dirt or torn seams could bring shame and suspicion. For the middle and upper classes, sending laundry out to professional laundresses became a common practice, despite the expense. These skilled workers collected clothes, washed and ironed them off-site, and returned them neatly folded and starched, offering relief to busy households. But no matter the method, the pursuit of cleanliness in dress was constant. Even the youngest children learned to check for dirty hands, and adults kept an eye on shoes, collars, and cuffs. The struggle for clean clothing was woven into the very fabric of Victorian life, a quiet, daily effort that defined not just appearance, but identity and belonging in a rapidly changing world. Victorian homes themselves posed their own set of hygiene challenges. Even among the wealthiest, city houses were dim, drafty, and difficult to keep clean. Coal was the main source of heat and cooking, and its fine black dust settled everywhere, on curtains, rugs, and even in food. Windows were rarely opened wide, since people feared drafts and bad air, so rooms could feel stuffy and musty, especially in winter. The battle against dirt began at the doorstep. Doormats and boot scrapers were essential tools, used to remove as much street grime as possible before entering. Servants or family members swept entryways and scrubbed floors on hands and knees, often with little more than water, sand, and elbow grease. Carpets and heavy drapes trapped dust, which had to be beaten out in the yard, sending clouds of soot flying. In kitchens and pantries, keeping pests away was a daily struggle. Food was stored in larders or cellars, sometimes packed in sawdust or covered with cloth to deter mice and insects. Despite everyone's best efforts, it was common to find signs of rodents or bugs, especially in crowded neighborhoods where rubbish collected quickly. Housewives waged a quiet war against these invaders, armed with traps, brooms, and occasionally harsh chemicals like carbolic acid. For the wealthy, daily cleaning was managed by teams of servants, housemaids, cooks, and scullery maids, each with their own set of duties. These staff members dusted, swept, polished, and aired out rooms. Brass doorknobs and candlesticks were buffed until they gleamed, and fireplaces were emptied and blackened anew. Even then, true cleanliness was hard to achieve. For the middle and working classes, cleaning had to fit around other responsibilities. A housewife might tidy in the early morning or late at night, after laundry, cooking, and childcare. Children were often assigned chores, learning to sweep, fetch water, or polish shoes. The routine could be exhausting, but it offered a sense of order and accomplishment. Cleanliness in the home was a point of pride and a mark of respectability, no matter how humble the surroundings. Yet, for all this effort, many Victorians still faced illness related to poor sanitation. In crowded areas, open drains and overflowing cesspools created a constant risk of disease. The infamous Great Stink of 1858, when the Thames became choked with waste, brought the problem to a crisis and forced new laws to improve city sanitation. Even so, the battle for a clean and healthy home was never truly won. Every day brought new dust, new pests, and new challenges. Yet the hope for a more comfortable, orderly life kept families scrubbing, sweeping, and trying their best to stay ahead of the grime. The struggle for cleanliness extended far beyond just homes and clothing. It was also a public challenge, one that shaped daily routines for everyone from the wealthiest noble to the poorest child. Streets in Victorian cities were noisy, bustling, and incredibly dirty. Horses clattered along cobblestone roads, leaving manure behind that mingled with mud, spilled food, ash, and all manner of refuse. Road sweepers, often boys or men desperate for work, tried to keep the worst of it at bay. But their efforts were no match for the steady tide of filth produced by millions of people and animals every day. In poorer districts, refuse piled up in gutters, and the stench became overwhelming, especially in the summer heat. Crossing the street without getting your boots caked in muck was almost impossible. People wore long coats and dresses that brushed the ground, picking up grime as they walked. For this reason, doorsteps and entryways were scrubbed every day, and many families placed straw mats or even shallow trays of water at their front doors for wiping shoes. Public facilities for washing were rare, so many relied on the simple act of rinsing hands and faces at public fountains or pumps. These pumps were gathering places, not just for water, but for gossip, news, and the occasional quarrel over who got to draw next. But the water from public pumps was often unsafe, contaminated by nearby cesspools or runoff from the streets. The lack of clean water made disease a constant threat, especially in crowded neighborhoods. In the 19th century, major cities began to introduce new systems for sewage and clean water, but the process was slow and expensive. Before these improvements, many homes used chamber pots, small, portable toilets kept under beds or in closets. In the morning, chamber pots had to be emptied, usually into a cesspit, a backyard hole, or, in the worst cases, out the window and into the street below. This practice made for streets that not only looked dirty, but smelled foul, and it's no wonder that many visitors wrote letters home, describing London and other big cities as beautiful but shockingly filthy. For the working poor, public bathhouses and washhouses became essential. By mid-century, reformers and city officials built more communal facilities where people could pay a small fee for a warm bath or a place to wash clothes. These places were far from luxurious. They were noisy, crowded, and sometimes not very clean themselves, but they offered a welcome relief from the dirt and discomfort of daily life. Families would make an outing of it, walking together to the wash house with bundles of laundry or towels in hand, and for a few hours they could enjoy the simple pleasure of hot water and a thorough scrub. As the century progressed, the push for public health led to new inventions and improvements. Flush toilets were invented and slowly became more common in wealthy homes, while new cleaning products began to appear in advertisements and shop windows. Companies boasted about the power of their soaps and powders to kill germs, freshen rooms, and leave everything sparkling clean, though most people still relied on homemade solutions for years to come. In these public and private spaces, the Victorian passion for cleanliness became a defining trait, one that shaped not only individual lives but entire cities. Cleanliness was a constant effort, a matter of personal pride and public duty, and even those who struggled the most worked hard to present themselves as neat, tidy, and respectable members of society, despite the constant challenge of a world that seemed determined to stay dirty. Victorian hygiene habits weren't just about washing and scrubbing. They also involved a complicated relationship with smells. In a time before air fresheners and deodorants, people became experts at masking or coping with odors. Streets were heavy with the scents of coal smoke, horse manure, and rotting food. But inside homes, it was the mix of human bodies, damp fabrics, and stale air that created its own unique atmosphere. The upper classes invested in perfume and cologne not just for fashion, but as a shield against unpleasant aromas. Scented handkerchiefs were carried everywhere, sometimes pressed to the nose in crowded spaces or held discreetly in the palm. Ladies and gentlemen dabbed lavender water on their wrists, sprinkled rose petals in drawers, or hung bunches of dried herbs from ceiling beams. Even clothing was often perfumed, as outer layers rarely saw a proper wash. The popularity of potpourri, pomanders, and incense grew, filling rooms with layers of floral and spicy scents to fight back against the ever-present smell of city life. But masking odor could only go so far, especially in crowded households where several generations shared a small space. With many people living, working, and eating in a single room, the air quickly became thick and stuffy. Poor ventilation made dampness a constant problem, Mold grew behind wallpaper, and floors warped from moisture. Windows were often kept shut for fear of bad air, though reformers later encouraged opening them to reduce illness. Bathing in fragrant herbs or even vinegar became a common practice, believed to purify both body and spirit. The fear of disease lingered everywhere, and doctors debated the causes. Was it the foul smells or the invisible germs that made people sick? The miasma theory, that bad air spread illness, ruled for decades, influencing everything from urban design to household cleaning routines. This belief fueled a culture of constant airing, cleaning, and the use of strong-smelling disinfectants. Vinegar washes, carbolic acid, and lime were scrubbed on floors and walls, especially in sick rooms, and families invested in the latest sanitary products when they could. Children learned early to fear the smell of sickness, and neighbors might judge a home harshly if it was thought to be unclean or foul-smelling. Public places did what they could. Churches and theaters burned incense or kept windows cracked open. Hospitals, especially after the influence of Florence Nightingale, became models of cleanliness, with strict protocols for washing hands and changing linens. Yet for most families, daily reality meant living with a certain baseline of smells and stains, no matter how hard they worked to keep them at bay. Clothing, furniture, and hair all absorbed the odors of city life. On warm days, the problem was worse, and families might move bedding outside or set bowls of vinegar in the corners of rooms to clear the air. Still, for many there was comfort in familiar scents: the waxy polish of a just-cleaned table, the faint perfume of soap on skin, or the rich aroma of bread baking in the oven. These everyday smells became woven into the fabric of memory and identity, a reminder that, for all its struggles, Victorian life was lived fully, with every sense, every day. As much as Victorians struggled with cleaning themselves and their homes, the era also brought about new inventions and ideas that slowly transformed hygiene practices. The second half of the 19th century was a time of rapid change, especially in the big cities, where industrialization introduced both modern comforts and new sources of filth. One of the most significant advances was the slow rise of indoor plumbing. In the early 1800s, having any kind of tap or pipe in your house was a luxury. By the end of the century, however, new water and sewage systems had begun to reach middle-class and even some working-class homes, though many poor families still relied on communal pumps and outhouses. The invention and gradual spread of the flush toilet was nothing short of revolutionary. While the very first versions appeared in the late 1500s, it wasn't until the Victorian period that flush toilets became practical and affordable enough for more than just royalty or the very rich. Early toilets were noisy, prone to leaks, and often smelled terrible if not properly connected to the new sewer lines. Still, the promise of a clean, convenient way to dispose of waste was irresistible. The first public flush toilets in London, known as monkey closets, opened at the Great Exhibition of 1851, causing quite a stir. Over time, the popularity of indoor toilets grew, and soon they were a mark of prestige and modernity. Bathing technology also improved. Metal bathtubs replaced wooden ones, and factories began to produce enameled iron tubs that were easier to clean and more durable. Some hotels and boarding houses started offering shared bathing facilities with hot and cold running water, a true novelty for those used to lugging buckets. But even with these advancements, many still found regular baths out of reach. Heating water was expensive and time-consuming, and most homes were not designed to support large plumbing installations. As the Victorian obsession with cleanliness deepened, new cleaning products appeared on the market. Soap makers advertised their products in colorful posters and magazine spreads, promising to banish dirt and disease. Disinfectants and powders lined the shelves of general stores, each boasting the latest scientific claims. Tooth powders, hair tonics, and deodorizing sprays promised fresh breath and sweet-smelling hair, though ingredients could be harsh and even dangerous by today's standards. Some products contained mercury, arsenic, or strong acids, and few regulations existed to protect consumers. Yet, people eagerly experimented with whatever might help them feel and smell a bit cleaner. The era also saw the rise of the public health movement. Reformers, horrified by outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis, pushed for cleaner water, better waste removal, and improved building codes. They championed ventilation, sunlight, and fresh air, and the design of homes and neighborhoods slowly began to reflect these ideals. Windows became larger, streets were widened, and parks were built to give city dwellers access to green space. Schools and factories adopted new rules for cleaning and hand washing, hoping to keep illness at bay. These changes took time, and many people, especially the poor, saw little improvement for decades. But step by step, the Victorian age laid the foundation for the hygiene standards we take for granted today. For children growing up in Victorian times, hygiene was not just a family responsibility, but a lesson in social order and discipline. From a young age, boys and girls were taught that neatness and cleanliness reflected their character. Mothers reminded children to wash their faces and hands every morning, inspecting behind ears and under fingernails for any missed dirt. Even in homes with limited resources, these small rituals became part of the daily routine, as important as saying prayers or completing schoolwork. Getting ready for school was an exercise in patience and adaptability. School uniforms or simple frocks were mended and patched, often handed down from older siblings. Shoes were polished with whatever was available, sometimes a bit of leftover fat or oil, and laces were repaired again and again. Children were expected to arrive at school looking tidy, even if their clothes were far from new. Teachers inspected hands and faces, doling out stern lectures or even punishments to those deemed too grubby. This attention to appearance was more than just vanity. It was rooted in the belief that clean, well-kept children would grow up to be responsible adults. At school, hygiene lessons were woven into everyday activities. Before lunch, students lined up to wash their hands at a communal pump or basin. The water was cold and the soap harsh, but teachers insisted on thorough scrubbing. Girls often learned sewing and mending skills alongside reading and writing, practicing how to care for clothing and keep linens fresh. Boys might be assigned chores like sweeping classrooms, cleaning blackboards, or carrying water, all part of learning the value of hard work and cleanliness. Public health campaigns sometimes reached into schools, distributing pamphlets about the dangers of dirt and the benefits of fresh air. Doctors or nurses might visit to check for lice or contagious illnesses, reinforcing the importance of bathing and proper care. Despite these efforts, outbreaks of disease were common. Head lice, ringworm, and impetigo spread quickly in crowded classrooms. When illness struck, children were sometimes kept home for weeks, missing lessons and falling behind. The poorest families faced the greatest challenges. Many lived in cramped rooms where privacy was impossible, and shared washing facilities with dozens of others. Bathing might happen once a month, if at all, and clothing was washed only when absolutely necessary. Still, families made the best of what they had, using ash, vinegar, or even sand to scrub skin and clothing. Even playtime reflected the realities of Victorian hygiene. Children invented games that involved water, like Splash the Pump or pretended to run their own little washhouses, mimicking the routines they saw at home. For many, learning to live with a little dirt was just part of growing up, but the lessons about pride, discipline, and self-respect lasted a lifetime, shaping how entire generations approached the challenge of staying clean in a world that was anything but. The relationship Victorians had with doctors and medical professionals was deeply connected to changing ideas about hygiene and cleanliness. In the early 19th century, many homes still relied on old remedies and folk wisdom, with mothers passing down advice about poultices, herbal teas, and the supposed benefits of fresh air. But as medical science advanced, new ideas about germs and infection began to spread. The arrival of germ theory, popularized by figures like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister, revolutionized how people understood disease. Before this, most believed that foul odors, so-called miasmas, caused sickness. As a result, families focused on getting rid of bad smells by scrubbing floors, hanging bunches of lavender, and burning vinegar in sick rooms. When doctors started to promote the idea that invisible germs, not just bad smells, were the real danger, it changed everything. Hospitals, once viewed as dangerous and dirty places where only the desperate went, began to transform. Nurses, inspired by pioneers like Florence Nightingale, introduced strict routines of hand washing, changing linens, and disinfecting surfaces. Patients were encouraged to keep themselves and their beds as clean as possible. In the home, parents listened more closely to the advice of doctors and health officials. Posters warned against spitting indoors, sharing cups, or neglecting to wash hands after visiting the privy. Soap became a symbol of modern living, and advertisements linked cleanliness to good health, happiness, and even moral virtue. Doctors began to recommend more frequent bathing, especially for children and the sick, though many families struggled to afford the cost and effort. Some home remedies persisted: mustard plasters for chest colds, onions tied around the neck for coughs. But gradually, store-bought tonics, ointments, and disinfectants took their place. As science advanced, so did skepticism about old superstitions. Even so, many Victorians clung to familiar routines, mixing new advice with traditions passed down through generations. In the city, visiting the doctor became a regular, if sometimes dreaded, event. Physicians made house calls, bringing leather bags filled with strange-smelling tinctures and odd instruments. They might instruct families to boil linens, scrub walls, and open windows, advice that, while sometimes difficult to follow, gave families a sense of control over their environment. For the poorest, access to medical care remained limited, but public health initiatives worked to spread basic messages about cleanliness, fresh air, and safe water. By the end of the Victorian era, the idea that, quote, cleanliness is next to godliness had become a guiding principle of daily life. Though their understanding of hygiene was still evolving, Victorians laid the foundation for many modern practices, turning the simple acts of washing, airing, and scrubbing into powerful tools for health and hope in a changing world. The rituals surrounding Victorian mealtimes offer another fascinating look at the era's approach to hygiene. For wealthier families, meals were formal occasions, often involving multiple courses, servants in starched uniforms, and carefully arranged place settings. Cleanliness was part of the performance. Tablecloths were spotless, silverware gleamed, and hands were washed before sitting down to eat. Even so, the challenges of keeping things truly clean were enormous. Food preparation happened in kitchens, where coal, smoke, and soot drifted down onto every surface. And running water, if it existed, was often cold and slow. Servants worked tirelessly to scrub pots and pans, sweep floors, and wipe down work tables. Perishable foods were stored in cool pantries, cellars, or ice boxes, but spoilage was a constant threat. Housewives sniffed and tasted everything before serving it, and strong flavors or spices sometimes masked ingredients that weren't quite fresh. In working-class homes, meals were simpler, but no less vulnerable to the dangers of dirt and germs. Most families bought food daily from open-air markets, where meat, fish, and vegetables were exposed to dust, flies, and the curious hands of passers-by. Bread was delivered by handcart, and milkmen left glass bottles on doorsteps where they might sit for hours in the sun or rain. Even water wasn't always safe. Families boiled it for tea or cooking, hoping to kill off anything harmful, but contamination was common. Dishwashing was another daily chore. Without modern detergents, Victorians used hot water, harsh soap, and plenty of scrubbing to clean plates and cutlery. Grease was tough to remove, and even the cleanest homes sometimes had a faint residue of old meals on pots or utensils. Servants might use sand or ashes as scouring agents, and some families reused dishwater for other cleaning jobs around the house. Children were taught to wipe their mouths and hands carefully during meals, and to thank the cook, a tradition rooted not just in manners, but in the understanding that a well-prepared meal was a small victory over the ever-present threat of illness. Table linens were changed and laundered as often as possible, but many working families used the same cloth for days, simply shaking out crumbs and dabbing away stains. Despite these difficulties, the act of sharing a meal, no matter how humble, was a moment of comfort and normalcy. In an age when people worried about the spread of disease, sitting down together, washing hands, and eating hot food became rituals of reassurance, quietly reinforcing the importance of cleanliness, order, and family ties. Victorian personal grooming habits were shaped by the limited resources and strict social expectations of the era. For both men and women, looking neat and presentable was essential, even if true cleanliness was difficult to achieve. Shaving, hair care, and the use of cosmetics all reflected broader trends in hygiene and fashion. Most men shaved at home or visited a barber for a close cut, though razors were expensive and needed constant sharpening. Shaving cream and aftershave were homemade or purchased from local chemists, often heavily scented to cover the sharp tang of old soap and iron blades. Beards and mustaches came in and out of style, but they also collected dust and food, so regular washing and combing were necessary to avoid both embarrassment and discomfort. Women's hair was their crowning glory, rarely cut and usually styled in elaborate ways. Washing hair was such a challenge that it might happen only once every few weeks. To keep hair looking fresh, women used dry powders, brushed it hundreds of strokes a day, and wrapped it in scarves at night. Hairpins, combs, and ribbons helped maintain intricate styles, and homemade oils or tonics were used to add shine and scent. Mothers passed down their tricks for fighting dandruff or lice, using vinegar rinses or herbal mixtures, and children were often checked for nits by the firelight before bedtime. Cosmetics existed, but they were far less common and more controversial than today. A truly respectable woman was expected to have a natural look, pale, clear skin, with rosy cheeks, but not to rely on obvious makeup. Some used homemade creams to soften their hands or lighten freckles, and lemon juice to brighten skin tone. A hint of rouge or powder was permissible, but too much color was seen as improper or even scandalous, especially for young girls. Perfume was used carefully, dabbed on handkerchiefs or at the wrists. In public, a sweet scent signaled good taste, while strong or musky perfumes could attract gossip. Dental care, meanwhile, was a constant struggle. Toothbrushes were made from bone or wood with stiff bristles, and toothpaste was often a powder of chalk, salt, or charcoal. Dentists were few and expensive, so most people tried their best to avoid them. Sore gums, aching teeth, and even tooth loss were sadly common, and remedies ranged from clove oil for pain to pulling teeth at home. Despite these difficulties, grooming routines were followed as closely as circumstances allowed. People took pride in presenting themselves well, even if it meant waking early, reusing water, or spending long hours brushing and braiding hair by candlelight. The effort was seen as a mark of discipline and self-respect, proof that, even in the face of hardship, Victorians valued order and dignity in the smallest details of daily life. Victorian sleep routines and bedroom hygiene revealed just how challenging it was to stay healthy and comfortable at night. Most families shared beds or bedrooms, especially among the working classes, where crowded living conditions meant little privacy. Parents and children, or even siblings of different ages, might sleep side by side, bundled together for warmth. Mattresses were often sacks filled with straw, horsehair, or even old rags, and over time, these materials grew lumpy, flat, and full of dust. Wealthier families had feather beds or spring mattresses, but even these collected mites and were difficult to clean. Changing bed linens was a time-consuming job. Sheets and pillowcases were made from heavy linen or cotton and needed to be washed, boiled, and ironed before use. Many families owned only one or two sets, so bedding was changed less often than today, sometimes just once a month. Between washings, housewives aired out mattresses by propping them up near open windows or beating them outdoors to remove dust and odors. Blankets and quilts were heavy and rarely washed, so people relied on fresh air and sunlight to keep them from smelling musty. Nightwear varied by class, with the rich favoring white cotton nightgowns and caps, while the poor might sleep in whatever was warmest or cleanest that day. Slippers and robes were used to avoid cold floors, but central heating was rare, so bedrooms often felt chilly. Chamber pots, kept under beds for nighttime use, had to be emptied every morning, a chore that fell to the youngest children or domestic servants. If not cleaned thoroughly, chamber pots could attract flies and contribute to unpleasant smells in already stuffy rooms. Windows were sometimes opened for a bit of fresh air, especially after advice from doctors and reformers, but fears of night air and drafts meant that many families slept with windows tightly shut, even in summer. Over time, reformers pushed for better bedroom hygiene, encouraging families to change sheets more often, sweep under beds, and keep rooms ventilated. Illustrated advice columns in women's magazines explained how to shake out linens, use vinegar for stains, and sprinkle lavender or other herbs to keep bedding fresh. The rise of household gadgets, like spring mattress lifters, carpet sweepers, and even early vacuum cleaners, helped those who could afford them, but most people still relied on basic tools and elbow grease. Despite the discomforts, bedtime rituals brought a sense of comfort and security. Stories were read aloud, prayers whispered, and sometimes a warm brick wrapped in flannel was tucked beneath the covers to chase away the cold. For many Victorians, the bedroom was a sanctuary, even if it was far from spotless. The effort to keep it clean and restful, however imperfect, spoke to the universal desire for peace at the end of a long, exhausting day. These quiet routines, repeated night after night, shaped the rhythms of life and left memories of simple pleasures, the scent of clean sheets, the hush of a darkened room, and the soft weight of blankets shared with loved ones. The world outside the bedroom presented its own unique challenges for Victorian hygiene, especially when it came to personal routines in public places. Bathhouses, public toilets, and even basic hand-washing facilities were rare or entirely absent in many areas. making trips out of the house a lesson in adaptation. For city dwellers, the public bathhouse was both a necessity and a social space. Families who could not afford their own bathing facilities at home would visit these communal establishments, where men, women, and children lined up for their turn in a shared tub or shower stall. Privacy was minimal, and towels or soap were sometimes provided for an extra fee. While the water might not always be clean by modern standards, the opportunity to soak, scrub, and warm up, especially in winter, was precious. These visits became part of weekly routines, with some families planning outings around bath days, and children looking forward to splashing in a real tub, even if it meant sharing with siblings or neighbors. Public toilets posed a different set of problems. Many neighborhoods relied on outdoor privies, simple wooden sheds built over pits or buckets that had to be emptied regularly. In the worst conditions, these facilities overflowed, attracting flies and spreading disease. Urban improvements gradually brought more brick-built public toilets and water closets, but access was limited, especially for women, who often faced long waits or had to pay to use clean facilities. The lack of adequate public restrooms made outings stressful for mothers with small children or anyone who worked long hours away from home. To cope, people learned to manage their routines carefully, avoiding food and drink before trips or relying on chamber pots brought along in carriages. In workplaces, hygiene standards varied widely. Factories, shops, and offices might have a single wash basin or none at all. Workers wiped their hands on aprons or handkerchiefs, and lunch was often eaten at one's workstation, surrounded by dust or oil. In markets and on busy streets, sellers handled food with bare hands, and customers brushed shoulders with strangers from all walks of life. Handkerchiefs were indispensable, a means to wipe faces, shield noses from strong smells, and clean up minor messes on the go. For the wealthy, travel was another arena where hygiene was both a challenge and a display of status. Fancy railway carriages and ships sometimes included washstands or even early bathrooms, but these amenities were rare. Most travelers packed their own grooming kits. Brushes, combs, soaps, and scented waters, kept in special cases to maintain order and dignity during long journeys. Still, even the richest Victorians found themselves at the mercy of dirty roads, crowded train stations, and the unpredictability of public facilities. For the poor, travel meant little more than walking, enduring whatever dirt, discomfort, and indignities the road provided. Despite these obstacles, the spirit of Victorian perseverance prevailed. People found small comforts where they could. A friendly conversation at the bathhouse, a clean handkerchief, or a moment of rest on a park bench. The effort to stay clean outside the home required creativity, patience, and a sense of humor, a testament to the adaptability and resilience of those living through an era of profound change. Even the smallest aspects of daily life in the Victorian era, like caring for pets, tending to gardens, or dealing with the weather, had an impact on hygiene in the ongoing battle against dirt. Many families kept animals, from working horses and dairy cows in the countryside to cats, dogs, and even caged birds in city homes. Animals brought companionship and sometimes a touch of luxury, but they also introduced new sources of mess. Pet hair collected on furniture, muddy paw prints appeared on carpets, and the task of cleaning cages or stables added yet another chore to the long list. Some households even kept pigs or chickens in small yards, especially among the poor, where every scrap of food was put to use. Manure and feed attracted flies and rodents, so regular cleaning was vital to keep disease at bay. Gardens and courtyards, while a respite from crowded interiors, were often muddy and cluttered. Rain turned dirt paths to sticky mud, and wet boots tracked it back inside, no matter how many times doormats were scrubbed or shoes were scraped. Gardening was a source of pride, but also hard, messy work. Turning soil, hauling water, and pruning plants left hands dirty and nails broken. Victorians prized a tidy garden, filled with flowers or vegetables, but keeping it orderly required constant effort, from sweeping paths to picking up wind-blown rubbish. Weather played a relentless role in household hygiene. Soot from coal fires clung to clothes and skin in winter, while rainstorms left city streets ankle-deep in mud and rural homes flooded with runoff. Droughts dried out wells and made water even more precious. On sunny days, families took the chance to air out bedding, sweep porches, and open windows. Simple acts that freshened the air and brought a sense of renewal, however temporary. In the worst conditions, floods or snowstorms could isolate families for days, making even basic cleaning difficult. Tools for keeping clean were as varied as the challenges themselves. Stiff bristled brushes scoured steps and floors, while brooms swept away dust from hearth and hallway. Scrubbing boards, buckets, and bars of soap were everyday companions. Homemade cleaning solutions, vinegar for windows, lemon juice for stains, ashes for scouring pans, were passed down through generations, along with tips for managing the constant onslaught of dirt and disorder. Children played their part, too, learning early how to feed animals, sweep paths, and wash up after coming inside. Though the work was endless, the rewards were real: a moment's rest in a clean room, the bright scent of herbs, or the sight of a tidy garden at dusk. These small victories became milestones in the ongoing pursuit of comfort and respectability. In every corner of Victorian life, from backyards to busy streets, hygiene was both a daily struggle and a deeply rooted value, shaping habits, relationships, and the very rhythm of home. Community life in the Victorian era brought its own blend of camaraderie and hygienic difficulties. Urban neighborhoods were dense, with families living side by side in terraced houses or crowded tenements, while rural villages clustered cottages and farmhouses close together. Neighbors borrowed water, shared gossip, and watched over each other's children, but they also shared privies, alleyways, and laundry spaces. Clotheslines crisscrossed backyards and courtyards, heavy with garments fluttering in the breeze. Children dashed between drying sheets, sometimes knocking them down into the dirt, while mothers hurried to rescue their clean washing from a sudden rain. Communal wells and pumps were gathering spots, but also potential sources of disease. A single contaminated bucket could affect an entire block. The arrival of the night soil man, whose job was to empty cesspools and privies, was both a relief and an embarrassment, his visits marked by pungent odors and the hope that he'd come after dark, when fewer neighbors were watching. Seasonal changes marked community cleaning efforts. In spring, families tackled spring cleaning, scrubbing walls, beating rugs, and whitewashing yards. Windows and doors were flung open, and entire neighborhoods buzzed with activity. In autumn, fires were readied, chimneys swept, and supplies of soap and candles restocked for the long winter ahead. Religious festivals or public holidays provided both a reason and a deadline for special efforts. Streets swept, doorsteps scrubbed, and even the poorest homes given a fresh coat of paint or lime wash. Social pressure played a powerful role in maintaining standards. A home judged dirty or unkempt might become the subject of gossip, and children teased if their clothes or hair looked neglected. Advice columns in newspapers and women's magazines offered tips for keeping a home tidy, recipes for homemade soap, or solutions for stubborn stains. Reformers visited working-class areas, promoting public health and encouraging cleanliness as a path to better living. Charitable societies sometimes distributed soap, towels, or clothing to the poorest, hoping to uplift not only bodies but spirits. At the same time, class divisions shaped what was considered acceptable. The wealthy could afford servants, indoor plumbing, and frequent changes of clothing, while the poor managed with ingenuity and hard work. Yet, across all classes, pride in a clean home and presentable appearance remained universal. Local churches and schools reinforced these values, organizing lessons, inspections, and sometimes even competitions for the cleanest home or neatest child. Despite the many obstacles, limited resources, crowded spaces, unpredictable weather, Victorians invested time, energy, and creativity in their homes and communities. Their commitment to hygiene and order reflected not only practical necessity, but a shared hope for health, dignity, and respect, making every swept step and scrubbed shirt part of a larger tapestry of everyday life. The rituals and struggles of Victorian hygiene extended into times of illness, when the fear of contagion shaped every detail of care. Sickness was an ever-present threat, with diseases like tuberculosis, cholera, diphtheria, and influenza haunting families of every class. When someone fell ill, the home was transformed into a sick room, and hygiene took on a new urgency. Curtains were drawn to block out drafts, and the patient's bed was moved near the window for fresh air, a practice encouraged by doctors after the rise of germ theory. Bed sheets were changed as often as possible, though for the poor this might mean simply turning them or airing them out. Sponges, cloths, and towels were kept separate, and drinking cups were carefully washed between uses. Caregivers, usually mothers, sisters, or hired nurses, washed their hands with carbolic soap and wiped down surfaces with vinegar or disinfectant, determined to keep illness from spreading. In wealthier homes, the sick room was equipped with a bell for summoning servants, clean linens, and sometimes even a small washstand for regular bathing. For the poor, who lacked both space and resources, sick rooms were makeshift, a bed curtained off in a crowded room, a bucket of water and cloth nearby. Everyone did what they could. Floors swept daily, chamber pots emptied promptly, and windows opened, weather permitting, to change the air. Food was prepared with extra care, served on the cleanest plates, and leftovers cleared away quickly to avoid spoiling. Doctors' visits were met with a mix of hope and dread. Physicians advised fresh air, clean bedding, and isolation if possible. Medicines, ranging from herbal teas to the latest chemical tinctures, were dispensed in careful doses, and the patient's body was sponged down to control fever. Neighbors and friends sometimes delivered soup, oranges, or fresh bread, leaving parcels at the door to avoid catching the illness themselves. In times of epidemic, whole neighborhoods might band together for cleaning efforts, scrubbing stairwells and alleys, washing windows, and disinfecting privies. Notices were posted about outbreaks, and public health officers made rounds, checking on the sick and offering advice or quarantine orders. Though fear was real, so was resilience. Children sent away to stay with relatives, families working together to keep spirits up, and communities offering practical help despite the risks. After recovery, a thorough airing was the rule. Mattresses and pillows were set outside, rooms scrubbed from floor to ceiling, and clothes boiled or left in the sun. Even as scientific understanding of disease advanced, old habits remained. A bunch of lavender for the sickbed, a penny under the pillow for luck. The experience of illness and recovery, with all its rituals and hard-won lessons, left lasting marks on Victorian life, shaping not only how families cared for one another, but how they understood the delicate balance between health, cleanliness, and hope. Victorian attitudes toward public health and sanitation shaped the very fabric of cities and towns, slowly transforming the environment in which people lived. The explosive growth of cities like London, Manchester, and Liverpool brought not only prosperity, but also crowded slums, filthy streets, and widespread disease. Early in the era, raw sewage flowed through open gutters and into rivers, while household waste piled up in alleys. The air was thick with smoke from factories and thousands of coal fires. Recognizing the urgent need for reform, civic leaders and reformers began a campaign for cleaner, healthier cities. Major breakthroughs came with the construction of underground sewers, an innovation that would save countless lives. London's massive new sewer system, engineered by Joseph Bazalgette after the Great Stink of 1858, became a model for the world. The project removed waste from city streets, dramatically reducing outbreaks of cholera and typhoid. Other cities soon followed, digging tunnels beneath crowded neighborhoods and connecting more homes to public water and sanitation. New laws required landlords to install toilets and provide access to clean water, though enforcement was slow and incomplete. Public bathhouses, washhouses, and drinking fountains multiplied, offering relief to working-class families who could not afford these amenities at home. In many neighborhoods, reformers promoted regular street sweeping, trash collection, and even tree planting as ways to improve both health and morale. Newspapers reported on sanitary conditions, publicizing the names of those who failed to clean up their properties or keep their drains in order. Public health officers patrolled the streets, inspecting homes and urging residents to scrub floors, air out bedding, and wash their hands. Schools, factories, and hospitals implemented new standards for cleanliness. Washing facilities, ventilated rooms, and regular linen changes became signs of progress. At the same time, popular culture embraced the ideals of cleanliness and order. Posters and pamphlets illustrated the dangers of filth diseases, while songs, poems, and children's stories celebrated the virtues of soap, fresh air, and clean water. Advertisers capitalized on the new enthusiasm, offering everything from germ-killing powders to air-purifying sprays. Yet, despite these advances, inequalities persisted. The poorest families still lived in damp, overcrowded rooms, often sharing a single outdoor privy or water pump with dozens of neighbors. Disease outbreaks reminded everyone how far there was to go. But step by step, the Victorian era built the foundations for modern sanitation. The legacy was more than pipes and drains. It was a new way of thinking about health, community, and the importance of every small act of cleaning in shaping a better future. In these public efforts, as in private routines, the struggle for hygiene became both a practical necessity and a source of shared pride, drawing individuals, families, and whole neighborhoods together in pursuit of a cleaner, safer world. The impact of Victorian hygiene practices on personal dignity and self-esteem was profound, coloring every aspect of daily life. In a society obsessed with appearances and reputation, cleanliness was seen as a direct reflection of character. Men and women worked tirelessly to maintain neat clothing and tidy homes, knowing that even a small stain or a whiff of unpleasant odor could attract disapproval or even social exclusion. Children internalized these expectations from their earliest days, watching parents scrub hands, polish shoes, and brush lint from collars. The pressure to appear spotless was especially intense for women, who were often judged more harshly for any signs of untidiness. Housewives juggled endless chores, washing, ironing, sweeping, and dusting, while balancing the demands of childcare and, in many cases, paid work outside the home. The appearance of the home, like that of the family, was a constant concern. Curtains were drawn and doilies arranged just so, in the hope of impressing visiting neighbors or relatives. Many families saved their best linens and clothing for special occasions, striving to present their finest selves to the outside world, even when everyday life was a struggle. For the working class, the pursuit of cleanliness could feel like a losing battle, especially in cramped lodgings where grime and dampness were constant enemies. Yet, pride in a well-swept doorstep, a clean shirt, or a mended sock was real and meaningful. Acts of washing and caring for others, bathing a child, tending a sick relative, or preparing a fresh bed offered small moments of satisfaction and self-worth. For those with more resources, personal grooming became an art. Visits to the barber, milliner, or dressmaker were opportunities not just for self-care, but for socializing and affirming one's place in the community. Even the rituals of applying cologne, brushing hair, or laundering lace gloves had a meditative, comforting quality. Despite the hardships, Victorians found dignity in these routines, transforming necessity into expressions of care, resilience, and hope. Social mobility was often tied to appearance, and for many, the dream of a better life was intertwined with the pursuit of a cleaner, more respectable existence. Advice literature, sermons, and even children's books reinforced the message: cleanliness is next to godliness. As cities grew and standards shifted, the meaning of cleanliness evolved too, blending old traditions with new scientific insights. The careful maintenance of self and home became both a daily challenge and a path toward a better future, shaping not just how Victorians saw each other, but how they understood themselves and their aspirations in a rapidly changing world. The relationship between hygiene and fashion in the Victorian era created its own challenges and peculiar solutions. Elaborate clothing, layer upon layer of petticoats, corsets, waistcoats, and frock coats, looked impressive but was notoriously difficult to keep clean. Outer garments were rarely washed. Instead, Victorians relied on frequent changing of undergarments to protect more expensive or hard-to-clean layers from sweat and body oils. Ladies wore chemises and petticoats beneath their dresses, while men donned linen shirts under their suits. These underlayers absorbed much of the dirt and were washed far more often than dresses or coats. Removing and cleaning a full set of clothing could take hours, and so-called change day was a major event in many households, involving boiling, scrubbing, and hours of ironing. Accessories, too, had to be cared for meticulously. Gloves, hats, and cravats were essential for completing a respectable look, but each brought its own cleaning woes. Gloves were spot cleaned or replaced regularly. Hats were brushed and kept in boxes to protect them from dust and fading. Shoehorns, boot brushes, and button hooks lined the entries of wealthier homes, while street shoe shiners did brisk business keeping city footwear presentable amid muddy streets. The rise of mass-produced clothing in the late 19th century made fashionable attire more accessible, but it also created new anxieties about keeping up appearances. Advertisements promised to banish stains and brighten whites, while etiquette manuals reminded readers to mend, starch, and brush their clothes with care. Dry cleaners began to appear in cities, offering specialized services for delicate fabrics or ornate gowns. For the less affluent, home remedies and ingenuity filled the gap: a dab of bread to absorb grease, chalk to brighten collars, and vinegar or lemon to erase ink stains. Sewing skills were vital. Rips, loose buttons, and frayed hems were fixed as soon as they appeared. The emphasis on fashion was not only about vanity, but about fitting into society. For working men and women, dressing up for church, an interview, or a public event was a source of pride and a way to claim dignity in the face of hardship. Children's clothing, too, reflected these ideals. Even the poorest families saved up for a neat Sunday outfit, carefully preserved and worn only on special occasions. The strict standards for neatness could sometimes feel stifling, and those who fell short faced real social penalties. Yet, fashion also offered a measure of joy, a chance to express individuality, celebrate milestones, or simply feel one's best. Through all the changing trends and relentless chores, the intersection of hygiene and fashion shaped not only how Victorians looked, but how they moved through the world, teaching resilience, adaptability, and the subtle art of making do with what they had. Hygiene in the Victorian workplace reveals another side of daily struggle. As people spent long hours in factories, offices, workshops, and shops, often with little access to clean water or washing facilities. The air inside textile mills, foundries, and coal mines was thick with dust, soot, or fibers, coating skin, hair, and clothing by midday. Factory owners were slow to install washrooms, and even when they did, these facilities were basic: a cold tap, a battered basin, maybe a bar of rough soap if workers were lucky. Employees wiped their hands on aprons or rags and made do with quick rinses before eating a midday meal, usually at their workbench or in a shared canteen. In large factories, grimy hands left smudges on bread and cheese, and by the end of a shift, boots were heavy with oil, clay, or ash. Women and children worked alongside men, often tasked with cleaning machinery, sweeping floors, or scrubbing parts with lye or sand. Their hands became red and raw, nails stained and chipped, but there was little time or money for relief. Offices and shops presented a cleaner front, but even here, real hygiene was limited. Clerks and shopgirls might use a communal washstand in a back room, or share a single towel among dozens. With coal fires heating every space, layers of soot settled on ledgers, shelves, and displays. Store windows required daily cleaning, and stock was dusted religiously, yet the dirt seemed endless. Hairbrushes and combs, kept in desks or purses, were used to quickly smooth stray hairs or brush away soot. Workers who dealt with the public felt constant pressure to look neat, and many brought spare collars, cuffs, or handkerchiefs to change as needed throughout the day. For street vendors, costermongers, and day laborers, staying clean was an impossible task. Their days were spent in the open air, rain, sun, or snow, pushing carts, hauling goods, and dealing with customers face to face. Most relied on the nearest public pump for a quick wash at dawn or dusk, or carried a rag to wipe sweat and grime from their faces. End-of-day rituals were simple: washing hands and faces at home, changing into a clean shirt if possible, and brushing the day's dirt from hair and clothing before sitting down to supper. Despite these hardships, pride in personal appearance ran deep. Workers formed cleanup clubs, pooling money for soap, towels, or even tickets to a public bathhouse. Factory girls prided themselves on spotless aprons, while miners' wives boasted of their ability to scrub away coal dust. Employers gradually responded to calls for reform, installing more washrooms and encouraging better habits. By the end of the century, workplace hygiene had become a subject of government interest and public debate, helping to set new standards for cleanliness and worker welfare. In every trade and at every station, the rituals of cleaning, however modest, provided a sense of order, dignity, and relief, a moment of calm in the relentless bustle of Victorian industry. Cleanliness in Victorian times wasn't just about the body or home. It extended to the things people carried and touched every day. Personal belongings like handkerchiefs, pocket watches, books, and even writing instruments needed regular care to stay clean and functional. Handkerchiefs were especially vital, serving as both a symbol of refinement and a practical tool for hygiene. Men and women alike carried several, tucked into pockets or sleeves, ready for everything from dabbing sweat to shielding noses from unpleasant odors on crowded streets. These squares of linen or cotton were washed and pressed with care, sometimes perfumed, and embroidered with initials as a mark of personal pride. Gloves, too, were cleaned and whitened regularly, since touching anything in public risked collecting dirt and germs. Leather gloves were wiped down and left to dry, while delicate kid gloves were cleaned with special powders or sent to glove cleaners. The act of putting on clean gloves before entering a shop, church, or someone's home became a ritual, a sign of respect for oneself and others. Pocket watches, treasured by both men and women, required careful handling. Dust and grit from city air could get inside the mechanism, so watch owners wound and wiped their timepieces daily, sometimes wrapping them in cloth or keeping them in protective cases. Books and newspapers, passed from hand to hand in parlors, train carriages, and libraries, were carefully dusted and kept away from food or dirty surfaces. In schoolrooms and studies, inkwells and pens needed constant attention. Ink stained hands and desks, so students learned to wipe nibs, close bottles, and wash fingers regularly. For children, chalk and slates were both educational tools and magnets for dust. School bags were emptied and cleaned, and slates washed at the pump before lessons began. Lunch pails, too, were scrubbed and dried each evening to avoid unpleasant smells or spoiled food the next day. In social settings, etiquette required a careful balance between politeness and hygiene. Gentlemen offered clean handkerchiefs to ladies, shared snuff boxes, or passed along carefully wiped fans or opera glasses. Calling cards were handled by the edges to avoid leaving dirty fingerprints, and refreshments at teas and receptions were served with tongs or on plates, rather than by hand. The attention to small things reflected a broader Victorian belief in the importance of order and care. Maintaining one's possessions was not just practical but a sign of good breeding. Even the poor, with few belongings, took pains to repair and clean what little they had, knowing that a spotless collar or well-cared-for boots could make all the difference in how they were seen. These habits, sometimes fussy by modern standards, helped create a sense of security and self-worth. Each polished watch, folded handkerchief, or freshly laundered glove became a quiet statement. I am respectable, I am careful, and I belong. The culture of hospitality and visiting in Victorian times brought another dimension to the rituals of hygiene and self-presentation. Receiving guests at home was both an honor and a test, with cleanliness playing a central role in every social interaction. When visitors were expected, families launched into a flurry of preparation, dusting mantels, sweeping entryways, polishing doorknobs, and arranging flowers to mask lingering odors. Parlors, where guests were entertained, displayed the best furniture, spotless antimacassars, and well-cared-for carpets, all signaling the family's attention to cleanliness and order. Tea services gleamed, and delicate cups were checked for chips or stains, while silver spoons and serving trays were buffed to a shine. Windows were wiped, and curtains shaken out to let in as much light as possible, giving rooms an air of freshness even when coal smoke and city grime pressed against the panes outside. Hosts themselves dressed carefully, donning clean collars, cuffs, and gloves, while women added ribbons or lace to their hair and tidied the hems of their dresses. Even children were scrubbed and instructed in good manners their hair neatly brushed and shoes shined. The act of welcoming someone over the threshold was as much about social standing as it was about warmth. The ability to present a clean, comfortable home was considered a moral duty, reflecting not just on the household, but on its place in the community. Guests brought their own hygiene routines, arriving with freshly pressed clothing and, often, gifts of flowers or homemade preserves, wrapped in clean cloths. Upon entering, gloves were removed and carefully folded, hats set aside, and hands discreetly checked for dust. Social etiquette demanded that no mention was made of any slip in standards, an overlooked cobweb, a child's muddy handprint, but hosts noticed everything, storing impressions for later gossip or admiration. Visits might include sharing food, and the rituals around tea, cakes, and sandwiches were opportunities to display both hospitality and hygiene. Dishes were passed with tongs or on trays, and napkins provided to avoid direct contact with hands. Children were reminded to cover sneezes and to use their handkerchiefs if needed. After guests departed, a second round of cleaning began, cups washed and put away, crumbs swept up, and cushions plumped to erase any sign of use. These routines were exhausting, but deeply satisfying, reinforcing bonds between friends and neighbors. In rural areas, hospitality took other forms. Neighbors might bring a pie to a new mother, or share a jug of cider after a day's work, with cleanliness just as important. Even the smallest cottage was scrubbed for visitors, and borrowed dishes or linens were returned, washed and carefully wrapped. These customs were more than tradition. They provided a framework for mutual respect, care, and belonging, with hygiene and presentation at the heart of every welcome. In this world, the simple act of opening one's door, confident that both self and home were clean and presentable, was one of the era's quiet triumphs. Seasonal rhythms had a powerful influence on hygiene and household routines in Victorian times, dictating not only what chores were done, but when and how they were accomplished. Spring was perhaps the most famous season for deep cleaning. Spring cleaning itself became a ritual in many homes. With the first warm days, families flung open windows, aired bedding and rugs, and scrubbed away the soot, dust, and damp of winter. Mattresses were propped outdoors, curtains washed, and every corner of the house was swept or scoured, from attic to cellar. Chimneys were cleaned in anticipation of another year's fires, and kitchen shelves were reorganized, with any spoiled food thrown away, and pans polished until they shone. Spring cleaning was not just about cleanliness, but renewal, the chance to start fresh after months of confinement indoors. Summer brought its own challenges and opportunities. Warm weather made bathing easier, with children sometimes splashing in ponds, rivers, or backyard washtubs. Washing clothes and linens was less of a burden when the sun could quickly dry them on outdoor lines. At the same time, heat and humidity accelerated the growth of mold and mildew, so constant vigilance was needed to keep rooms smelling fresh. Flies and other insects invaded kitchens, drawn to scraps and spills, so netting, traps, and daily cleaning became essential parts of the routine. Fall was the time to prepare for winter's hardships. Houses were inspected for leaks or drafts, and extra layers of bedding, curtains, and clothing were cleaned and set aside. Stores of soap, candles, and kindling were replenished, while late autumn was the last chance to wash and air out heavy blankets, rugs, or coats before cold weather returned. Families preserved food, salting, smoking, or bottling fruits and vegetables, which meant extra kitchen mess and careful attention to hygiene to avoid spoilage. As winter descended, the focus shifted to maintaining warmth and light. Fires were kept burning, but the resulting soot meant more frequent dusting and washing, especially in small, poorly ventilated rooms. Water might freeze in jugs or pumps, making washing difficult. Families did their best with what they had, reusing water, spacing out laundry days, and sharing chores to lighten the load. Every season, the cycles of work and rest, cleanliness and comfort, connected Victorians to the world outside their doors. These seasonal rituals were as much about community as they were about hygiene. Neighbors helped each other. Children learned from parents and grandparents, and entire streets buzzed with activity during the great spring cleans or harvest festivals. The effort to keep pace with nature's changes became woven into the fabric of daily life, instilling both resilience and a deep appreciation for the simplest pleasures. The scent of line-dried sheets, the gleam of polished wood, or the quiet satisfaction of a freshly swept stoop at dusk. Religious beliefs and moral values had a significant impact on hygiene practices throughout the Victorian era, shaping not only personal habits, but also wider social attitudes. Cleanliness was frequently equated with godliness, a phrase repeated in sermons, advice books, and family conversations. Many believed that a clean body and a tidy home were outward signs of inner virtue, reflecting discipline, respect for others, and even spiritual purity. Sunday was a special day for both rest and reflection, but it was also a time when families made extra efforts to bathe, don their best clothes, and tidy their homes in preparation for church or visits from neighbors. Even the poorest families did their best to present a neat appearance on the Sabbath, mending garments and brushing shoes on Saturday night, so that everyone would look their finest come Sunday morning. Churches reinforced these values, sometimes organizing cleanliness missions that offered soap, towels, or even free baths to the needy. Ministers and charity workers visited homes, offering encouragement and practical help to those struggling to maintain standards. Religious schools taught children about the importance of washing hands, faces, and feet, connecting these acts to lessons about humility, discipline, and respect for God's creation. Public health reformers, many of whom were driven by faith, viewed their work as a moral calling. They advocated for better sanitation, cleaner streets, and improved housing, believing that physical cleanliness would lead to healthier, more virtuous communities. Tracts and pamphlets distributed by religious societies linked dirty living conditions to vice, crime, and disease, while promoting the benefits of fresh air, sunlight, and soap. Moral stories in magazines and children's books depicted characters who rose out of poverty and hardship by embracing cleanliness and order, messages that encouraged readers to persevere even when resources were scarce. At the same time, attitudes toward hygiene were sometimes shaped by harsh judgments and social divisions. Those unable to meet prevailing standards risked not just gossip, but outright exclusion from church or community events. The link between poverty, dirt, and perceived moral failure was strong, making it even harder for the most vulnerable to seek help. Still, for many Victorians, the rituals of washing, dressing, and preparing the home for Sabbath or holy days brought genuine comfort and a sense of dignity. Shared prayers and songs in a clean, candlelit parlor or chapel offered a moment of peace, reinforcing the connections between body, spirit, and community. The blend of religious faith, moral teaching, and practical necessity helped make cleanliness not only a matter of habit, but a cornerstone of identity, one that left a lasting mark on both personal and public life in the era and beyond. The influence of Victorian hygiene reached far beyond Britain's borders, as the empire stretched across continents and carried its customs to distant lands. British travelers, colonists, and officials brought their routines and expectations with them, whether settling in Australia, Canada, India, or Africa. In bustling colonial outposts and remote rural settlements alike, the pursuit of cleanliness was seen as a mark of civilization and British identity. Expatriate families attempted to recreate the comforts of home, setting up tidy drawing rooms, scrubbing verandas, and insisting on proper dress, even in sweltering heat or unfamiliar climates. Household guides and advice columns tailored to life abroad offered tips for coping with new pests, managing limited water supplies, and adapting English recipes with local ingredients. Servants or local workers were often employed to fetch water, launder clothing, and maintain gardens. Chores made even more laborious by the heat, dust, and unpredictable weather of colonial environments. British officials worried about the health of their families, importing medicines, disinfectants, and cleaning supplies, and sending letters home describing the challenges of keeping children safe from tropical diseases. Missionaries and teachers introduced hygiene lessons to local communities, teaching children to wash hands and faces, clean their teeth, and keep living spaces tidy. In hospitals and military camps, British standards of cleanliness were enforced with military precision, floors scrubbed, sheets boiled, and latrines dug and covered. Public health campaigns, modeled after those in London and Manchester, were launched to build wells, install drains, and vaccinate children. At the same time, the colonial obsession with cleanliness often led to misunderstandings and tensions. Local customs and beliefs about hygiene sometimes clashed with British expectations, and there were moments of arrogance or insensitivity as newcomers imposed their routines on unfamiliar cultures. Yet for many, these exchanges also created opportunities for learning, adaptation, and even friendship. Families adopted local remedies, foods, and cleaning techniques, and in some cases, British hygiene standards themselves were transformed by encounters with new environments and ways of life. Letters, diaries, and photographs from the era reveal both the pride and the anxiety of maintaining, quote, standards far from home. Children growing up overseas learned a blend of English and local habits, bathing in rivers, eating meals outdoors, or sweeping houses with brooms made from palm leaves. Despite the challenges, the pursuit of cleanliness offered a sense of stability and comfort, a daily ritual that connected expatriates to their roots and helped define their place in a changing world. The legacy of Victorian hygiene, for better or worse, became part of the global story, shaping cities, institutions, and lives across generations and continents, and reminding us how deeply ideas about cleanliness, respect, and identity are woven into our shared human experience. The evolving world of Victorian science and invention brought new hope and new anxieties to everyday hygiene, forever altering the rhythms of home and health. As the 19th century drew on, advances in chemistry, engineering, and medicine introduced a dizzying array of new products and ideas. Soap, once made at home or bought in rough bars, became a major industry. Advertisements promised dazzling whiteness, sweet scents, and miraculous protection against illness. Chemists invented powders to clean teeth, freshen breath, and disinfect wounds, though ingredients sometimes proved harsh or dangerous. Lister's antiseptics revolutionized surgery and inspired families to add carbolic acid or phenol to wash water. For the first time, ordinary people spoke of germs and microbes, and health officials warned about invisible dangers lurking in water, milk, or dust. Plumbing innovations from the siphon flush to the ballcock valve brought the possibility of running water and indoor toilets to millions, though installation remained slow and expensive for the poor. Tin baths and portable washstands became more common, and the bathroom gradually shifted from a luxury to a desired feature in new homes. Electric lights, replacing gas or candles in some cities, revealed dirt and stains that had previously gone unnoticed, prompting more scrubbing and higher standards. The popularity of magazines and serial novels brought the latest advice, fads, and cautionary tales into every sitting room. Some stories celebrated sparkling homes and fashionable new gadgets, while others stoked fears of contamination or moral decline. Quack remedies and miracle cures flooded the market, promising health through cleanliness but sometimes preying on anxieties and emptying wallets. Meanwhile, philanthropists and reformers pressed for ever higher public standards, tracking disease, measuring air quality, and founding institutions for hygiene education. Not all change came smoothly. Older generations sometimes resisted new routines, clinging to trusted habits or doubting newfangled claims. Children grumbled at extra hand washing, and some feared the unfamiliar smells of chemical disinfectants. The sheer effort of keeping up, with new products, shifting advice, and changing fashions, added fresh pressures, especially for women managing busy households. Yet many welcomed the relief these innovations brought. Laundry became a little easier with new soaps. Sore gums found comfort in gentler powders. Houses felt brighter and fresher with better ventilation and lighting. Scientific knowledge reshaped not only what Victorians did, but how they felt about their bodies, homes, and world. Cleanliness, once a private virtue and social performance, became part of a national project, a sign of progress, prosperity, and even patriotism. In every city and village, the march of invention wove itself into daily life, blending old rituals with new discoveries and leaving a legacy that would echo through generations to come. As the Victorian age neared its end, the pursuit of hygiene stood as both an achievement and a reflection of deeper social change. New generations, shaped by the lessons and inventions of their parents, approached cleanliness not just as duty, but as an expectation of modern life. School children recited rhymes about brushing teeth and washing hands, while public health posters appeared in train stations, workplaces, and even parks, reminding everyone to bathe, air out rooms, and beware of germs. City planners and reformers built new neighborhoods with better drainage, wide boulevards, and green spaces, believing that clean, orderly environments would inspire moral and physical well-being. The ideal of the sanitary home, bright, dry, and well-ventilated, became a powerful symbol of progress. For many, this was an era of real hope. Mothers could access safer water for their children, fathers took pride in plumbing and new gadgets, and families aspired to modern bathrooms, tiled kitchens, and reliable laundries. Public baths and washhouses became gathering places for working-class communities, offering relief from the grind of dirty streets and crowded rooms. Charities and city councils worked to make soap, towels, and even toothbrushes more widely available, reducing the gap between rich and poor, at least in matters of basic cleanliness. Women's magazines and household guides chronicled every new technique, from bleaching linens to disinfecting baby bottles. At the same time, anxieties lingered beneath the surface. Some worried that too much focus on hygiene bred snobbery or self-importance, creating a new divide between those who could keep up and those who struggled. Others lamented the loss of simpler times, when fresh air and elbow grease were valued more than chemical sprays or expensive devices. Immigrants arriving in British cities or in colonies abroad brought their own customs, sometimes clashing with or enriching Victorian routines. There were ongoing debates about the best ways to manage waste, filter water, or fight disease, and no single approach could address the diversity of environments and lives across the empire. Even so, the spirit of the age was forward-looking. Scientific discoveries continued to accelerate, giving rise to new vaccines, purer medicines, and better understanding of nutrition and disease. Children learned not only to bathe, but to question why and how things worked. Women advocated for better housing, maternity care, and public cleanliness. The last decades of the Victorian era saw cleanliness not just as a matter of health or appearance, but as an evolving, collective project, a sign of belonging in a world that was constantly changing. These values, and the routines they inspired, would survive long after Queen Victoria's reign, shaping modern life in ways both visible and hidden, and reminding us of the enduring power of small daily rituals to change lives and societies. In the quiet moments of daily life, away from the bustle of work and public performance, Victorian hygiene became an act of self-care and even comfort. Evening routines took on a gentle, almost meditative quality as the sun set and families gathered at home. Lamps were lit, hands and faces washed at the basin, and children changed into nightshirts or flannel pajamas. Parents combed hair, checked fingernails, and made sure the day's dust was brushed from clothes before setting them aside for the next morning. A bowl of warm water might be shared for a final rinse, soap gently lathered between small hands, and towels hung by the hearth to dry. Mothers soothed infants with damp cloths, while older children learned to care for their own bodies and help siblings prepare for bed. The act of cleaning became intertwined with stories, songs, and whispered prayers, rituals that smoothed the transition from busy day to restful night. Candles cast soft shadows as beds were turned down, blankets shaken and arranged, and windows cracked open for a breath of fresh air if the weather allowed. Chamber pots were checked and set within easy reach, while shoes were lined up neatly for the next day's polishing. For many, this was the calmest hour, a chance to reflect, share news, or simply enjoy the order and comfort created by hours of hard work. Personal treasures were put away: a cherished book, a well-cared-for doll, a favorite handkerchief folded and placed on the bedside table. In the quiet hush, the lessons of the day lingered, a reminder of the importance of caring for both body and spirit. The elderly found solace in the predictability of these routines, their hands steady as they cleaned dentures or wrapped hair for the night. Young couples might share whispered conversations as they washed together, building habits they hoped would last a lifetime. Even those living alone performed their rituals with care, finding in them a sense of dignity and connection to others. Illness or hardship could make these routines more difficult, but also more meaningful. The effort to keep clean, even in small ways, became an act of hope, a statement that tomorrow might be brighter, and that every life, no matter how humble, deserved comfort and respect. Through these nightly practices, Victorian families affirmed their resilience and humanity, weaving cleanliness into the fabric of their most intimate moments, and finding in the struggle against dirt and disorder a source of strength, love, and lasting memory. Looking back on the countless details and routines that defined Victorian hygiene, we see a world both familiar and strikingly different from our own. The unending struggle with dust, soot, and germs was a central theme in every household, shaping relationships, ambitions, and even dreams. The smallest acts, a mother scrubbing her child's hands, a worker brushing mud from boots, a young girl folding a cherished handkerchief, became silent declarations of dignity and hope. Cleanliness, hard-won and often fleeting, stood as a symbol of self-respect and belonging in a society where every stain or scent was noticed and judged. The inventions and reforms of the Victorian age, flush toilets, public baths, mass-produced soap, were more than conveniences. They reflected a collective belief that the future could be brighter and healthier, if only everyone did their part. Yet, beyond inventions and rituals, it was the daily choices and small victories that truly defined the era. In crowded tenements and grand mansions alike, families battled against time and circumstance, wielding brushes, soap, and water as tools of hope. Children learned early the value of neatness, elders passed down advice and recipes for cleaning, and entire communities worked together to lift standards, not just for comfort, but for respect and pride. There was, in all this effort, a certain grace, a willingness to face imperfection with perseverance and good humor. While the challenges of Victorian hygiene could be exhausting, they also created moments of togetherness, neighbors exchanging tips, mothers and daughters chatting over laundry, fathers sharing jokes while scrubbing boots. The rituals of cleaning, repeated, adapted, and passed down, offered not only relief from dirt, but a framework for love, trust, and resilience. As we drift from the candlelit bedrooms and bustling streets of Victorian England, we remember that the pursuit of cleanliness is more than a battle against grime. It is, at heart, an affirmation of care for ourselves, for others, and for the world we inhabit. The legacy of Victorian hygiene lives on in the habits we keep, the homes we cherish, and the belief that, no matter how messy life may become, even the smallest efforts can make a difference. So tonight, as you settle into clean sheets and close your eyes, know that you are part of a long tradition, a gentle, determined struggle for comfort, order, and a little peace at the end of every day.